Good afternoon.
Afternoon. How are you both?
Good. Yeah. Friday afternoon. Sun's out.
Yeah, should be in the pub.
Weekend's in sight.
Yeah,
We're inside in an old diamond room with no air conditioning, and
it's fine.
Yeah, it felt like a good idea. I guess starting point, introduction would be great. Tell us about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, we don't want to get you confused with any other Mark Fosters out there.
Yeah, that's understandable. There's a lot older and slightly better looking swimmer who with the same name. So yeah, Mark Foster, Senior Vice President of Finance at Live Golf. I have a very unusual CV. Ex-professional rugby player for 13 years, and then did kind of various jobs, both in offshore in Jersey, but then in London as a advisor in accountancy practices at Deloitte and Evelyn Partners, and then went on to run finance functions in some big developers in real estate, and then ended up at Live Golf about 3 years ago.
Super. And why finance?
Lots of different reasons. Like I grew up in a nice part of Surrey, and always knew that if I wanted to lead a certain life, I would have to go and get a decent job someday. And when I came out of rugby, before I was going to play rugby, I was going to have a spot at university to go and do economics. And so I always kind of thought I wanted to go in that direction after rugby, and then realised that I could go back to university and do an undergrad and walk away with 10, 20, 30 grand's worth of debt, or someone would pay me to go and do my ACA, or I could go and do that and train, and then hopefully, because I was slightly older, go and accelerate my career a bit better after that. And I had an unusual story, and here we are, and it's thankfully gone okay so far.
Great. Tell us about the end of sport, and because I know that's a tough moment for professional sports people, and it comes to an end.
It was. I don't think it was, honestly, it wasn't that tough for me. No. I was player coach at Jersey, and went over there on loan from Exeter for a few months at the end of the season. Decided I really liked it and signed a 2-year contract. Went through like a few different coaches when we were there, when I was helping out with that. And then I was coaching the Colts one day, and I was thinking about retiring. I was working on my days off. I'd done some of my investment management qualifications in my own time. And a nice lady called Jennifer Le Chevalier came over and was like, I'm a director at this massive fiduciary. We've got clients all over the world. It's really interesting. We do lots of inbound UK wealth. I haven't got a clue what you're going to do, but why don't you come in and chat to me and the MD? And, we're looking for like interesting people who have a different kind of story, and we think we could do something really exciting with you. So that was it. It was a really binary decision. I kind of played all the rugby I really wanted to play, and had an amazing time at Gloucester and at Exeter. And then it was just a case of, okay, what next? And someone said, look, here's a job. It was really diverse. It wasn't kind of being pigeonholed early into like being an auditor or a tax advisor. It was, really commercial, really nice team and some great kind of people to learn off. So I finished rugby on the Friday, drank for 2 days, and went to work on the Monday. Almost got sacked in my first week for some rugby behaviour in the office or post office. There's a slightly weird story where pulled in on the following Monday by my boss at the time, and she's like, "There's a video of you with your shirt off, with your tie around your head, judging a squat competition in a bar just next to the office." And they had this end of month Friday drinks. Where the trolley had come around. I'd had couple of cold Stellas. That's delicious. Going into the kitchen, there's just like enormous floor to ceiling fridges just full of ice cold beer. Boiling hot day in the summer in Jersey, so I've helped myself, gone fully into it, as most rugby players would do. And then you got a bit carried away where two people I worked with had argued what a proper squat depth looked like, and I declared that it was a squat competition. Shirt obviously tie around the head, mandatory judging attire for a squat competition. And there's videos of me screaming like, no rep, at like 11:30 at this bar. And so I was quietly told by my boss at the time, this is not really the behavior we expect in a business like this. So if you could kind of smarten it up, if you don't, you won't last here very long. So there's a few people throughout my career I kind of owe my ability to still be employable to, after various, I guess, professional faux pas, which come with, being institutionalized in sport and then trying to go into something very serious like finance.
Mm-hmm. Did you make a decision to kind of, lots of people go on to do maybe coaching roles, and you said you did play a coach role. So what was it for you that, aside from maybe the financial piece you talked about earlier, what was it for you that made you want to make a bit more of a clean break from rugby and go and do something professional? Was it purely financial, or were there other drivers?
No, there's a few things. I think in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to do a stint in a kind of a very commercial job. And I knew I needed to kind of go and build a certain skill set for that. I looked around rugby and I saw a lot of friends trying to kind of be coaches or really eking out their playing days till like their mid and late 30s, and breaking their body for kind of very little return. And I kind of always, tragic's like an unfair word, but it always felt a bit kind of like, gosh, you're kicking the arse out of this because you don't have a plan here. So for me, there was always kind of a fairly strong plan. And in the early years, it was about going to get as diverse a skill set and knowledge base as I could go and find, and go and meet as many people as I could. And things like professional sport give you an automatic kind of conversation starter with people. And especially when you go into something like finance or even kind of, senior commercial roles, people are just interested, like, oh, what have you done? Because quite often, a lot of these people in these roles wanted to be professional athletes when they were kids. They wanted to be professional football players or rugby players or tennis players. And the fact you've done that and then you're in the same room as them, they're like, okay, that's interesting. Let's have a chat about that. I mean, my first ever real job in the city, and he won't mind me mentioning it, an incredible guy called Mark Webb, who now leads all of the kind of provincial partnerships for Evelyn Partners, a massive, $50 billion AUM asset manager. And my interview with him, revolved around, what I knew about tax, which was probably 10 minutes, and then probably a good 45 minutes on who's going to win the Premiership that year. And he, is still to this day one of my mentors. And we talk about rugby less and less now, and more about, I need help with this problem. Can you fix it for me? But it's, it's fascinating as you go through that journey and that transition. Fascinates people in, very high level professional environments, because it seems so alien, because they could never go the other way and do it. There's no ability to be an accountant and go just choose to be a professional rugby player, whereas you do have the ability in sport to actually choose and kind of say, I want to go and do that. And if you've got the work ethic that comes with those sports and the kind of the ability and the drive and the network, then it is really, the world is your oyster. And I get frustrated with a lot of young players now. I said, you work 13 hours a week. Why are you not out in your spare time, gaining skills, meeting people? Because so much of, transitioning sport is actually knowing what you want to do. Because candidly, people tell me now, like, I want to work in finance. I'm like, oh, cool. Like, any particular part of it? Because we've got investment banking at one end and, being a bookie at the other end, which ultimately you could argue one and the same thing sometimes. But the reality is, that spectrum is so vast. Trying to understand actually what interests you, what type of work you want to do, the cadence and how intensely you want to work, how much money you want to earn, and what kind of lifestyle you want, kind of all go, fit together to work out what direction you want to go to. And starting is the hardest bit. I started in a little kind of family advisory office part-time, big fiduciary, big kind of advisory businesses, then Deloitte, so like monster global advisory businesses, and then knew that maybe that wasn't me. So you're kind of coming down and stepping down the other side and working out, feeling your way through. Now, hopefully I've got to a point where I kind of know what I want to do.
Yeah. There's a lot of ex-professional sports people that go into business and have really successful careers like yourself. But what do you think it is that professional sport has given you that has enabled your success? What are the sort of the attributes that you've learned that have really translated into a successful corporate career?
A lot of it is resilience. I think your ability to just tolerate huge amounts of pressure and pain, collision sports especially come with that. So I had a conversation with some guys earlier today, and they said, what's the hardest thing you've done in training? And I said, we used to do this thing at Exeter called the self-motivation circuit, dreamt up by some crazy Marine PTs. 4-2 Commando is right by Exeter Chief. So we used to get all these slightly mad Marines come out and be our physical ed coaches. And so they sat us in a room and put Gladiator on in the dark and just put everyone in kind of like cross-legged, not stress positions, but not particularly comfortable, hard gym floor. They would just pull us out 3 by 3. You'd walk into this room and there would be 3 lanes of kit, like rower, assault bike, burpee station, mat flip station, boxing station. They'd be like, okay, there's no rules here. You will go as hard as you can go from the whistle. And if we think you're working hard enough, we will move you on to the next station. If we don't think we're hard, we'll move you back a station. There is no time limit. You cannot complete this, but you will go and go and go. If you would like to step out at any point, absolutely. We won't think any the worse of you. If you want to be sick, please be sick over there. If you want to cry, please do it on someone else's time. It ended up being about, that must be about 10, 12 minutes of like deep hurt locker pain, like just pure anaerobic suck. It was absolutely horrific. We had one guy just come back from his honeymoon, threw up all over the floor in the gym, got made to clear it up. Another guy walked out crying, like fully broken by it. And so I was trying to parallel it back to these guys. And so when you were getting, very stressful things early in your career where you don't really know your arse from your elbow and you're trying to work out, trying to manage risk and trying to understand what you do and don't know in a quite complex scenario sometimes, it's never that level of pain and pressure. It's just a complex problem and you just systematically work through it. And and it works well. And then also then with like when you're training and stuff, the cadence of a normal working week in sport is very similar to how, you know, businesses work, certainly in the advisory space, but also when you're you're learning essentially through like ACA or CFA, because you basically need the ability to kind of go, right, I've got a project, you know, I've got a block to learn this week, smash through that as hard as you can, do all the tertiary bits around it, be that work, be that other things, and then reset on the weekend, go again, which is exactly what, you know, sport is. And so that combination of things, yes, I was very lucky. I've got very smart parents. They brought me up, you know, very diligently. We were bright at school. So all of that in aggregate means that actually there's a lot of things that go into it, but yeah, you need a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck, and some good people around you.
Yeah. Just quickly, you conveniently said one person was sick.
Yeah.
One person was crying.
Yeah.
You never said what happened to you at the end of that story.
I was okay. It was funny. I was in with two other wingers, a French guy called Nick Sesteret and this guy called Matt Jess, who is one of the freakiest athletes I've ever met on the planet. He's just the Haymore harpoon, we used to call him. That's a different story. And they basically kept us at different points in the circuit. So we couldn't talk to each other and be like, come on, you know, keep going. And like that self-talk. And three very, very smart, you know, one ex-SBS weirdo who had like all his blood groups tattooed on different parts of his body in case he lost limbs in battle, called Dave Silvestro, who's now with England. Paddy Anthony now runs the English Institute of Sport, and a guy called Mark Twiggs, who's still Exeter. And yeah, they would just create these environments and scenarios where the concept was that you would always mentally break way, way, way before your body would break. And nobody, maybe bar some of the best ultra athletes in the world, really understand where the end is and what your true tolerance to kind of physical degradation is. Which, you know, when I say it in the cold light of day, seems something like so you get in kind of like a prisoner of war camp. But actually, in terms of what you need to perform at the most elite level of sport, to really empty the tank and then have that last 10 minutes and that half break or make that last tackle, that is really what sets apart kind of first versus fifth in the Premiership and in these kind of elite sports competitions.
Yeah, I would have cried. You?
Probably, yeah. So you obviously in hard work instilled in you from the outset, discipline, the cadence of working in professional sport. So loads of good things coming into the business world. What didn't you have, and what did you have to develop and finesse over the sort of recent years being a senior finance leader?
Apart from self-control at social events.
Yeah, self-control at socials. I still struggle with that now. A lot of it is just pure technical. Yeah, I think I remember speaking very early on. A guy called Tom Shave came over from Deloitte, now very senior at Evelyn Partners, and we were talking. And he was always saying, "Look, you just need to get through your technical stuff and build your technical as fast as you can, because the reality is it's like a driving test." Mm-hmm. The technical bit just gives you the passport to get into the room. You don't actually learn to drive during your driving test. You don't have that kind of comfort of traveling, you know, at the speed limit on the motorway, as we all do, and to be able to change lanes and understand what happens when things go a little bit wrong. And he said it's exactly the same thing. And so getting through my ACA was just, you know, I did it as fast as I could. I finished probably in 18 months, just under 2 years, despite probably failing a couple of papers on the way through. My boss at the time was like, I'm going to take 3 at a time. Even my last 4 hours ago professional papers, and take them in consecutive days, just so I just need to get this done. I was 33 at the time. And it was just this never ending cycle of, you know, trying to stay under 18 stone in the mornings, going to the office, working, you know, 8-9 hour day, coming out, studying, going home. Thankfully, the woman who supported me through all of it is now my wife. She's done the hard yards. So yeah, it was all technical for me. And then once you get outside of like the core technical accounting bits, it was like, okay, how do you run a business, and what is the stuff that scares you? Is it cash flow? Is it, you know, going into dodgy contract negotiations? Is it, you know, massive reputational risk? Is it, you know, pure liability and you can underwrite and insure that? And that varies hugely. Like working at real estate businesses, you know, the liability of building collapsing on someone, or, you know, funding falling through is very different compared to putting on, you know, global events and building a global e-commerce franchise where the risks are, you know, incredibly different. And so it's then understanding and knowing what you don't know as well, and then going out into the market and finding those people to support you with that, because anyone who says they know everything is either deluded or a liar, in my opinion. Especially in something like tax, you know, you can't know, you can know enough to kind of get yourself in trouble. but not kind of to the letter of the law in terms of, looking at these massive tax filings and documents. So it's business. It teaches you a huge amount of things, but so much of the sports stuff goes into that. And the biggest stuff you correlate is probably like team building and being able to go build like those high performing teams who will go on that journey with you and go through the slightly rougher times. And it's that environment you create. I mean, rugby, you get naked and get drunk. I suggested that on my first day at Live. At the time, the head of HR was like, probably not the best thing we can do. So we had to find other ways to kind of motivate and kind of install that real kind of elite collaborative spirit in those teams.
And tell us about the Live journey. Obviously, so I'm a big golf fan. It's there's controversy around it. It's been a massive disruptor. I think people will be interested to know. And also, as a finance person, when you're not given, but you've got such an amount of money to potentially play with, it's an interesting dichotomy in a world of cost of living crisis and all the rest of it, and lots of businesses going the other way and cost cutting. I think it'd be interesting to know more.
Yeah, I mean, Live is an incredible product. Of course, like it has its nuances, like all businesses. I think there was always a gap in the sports market. There's still lots of gaps in lots of sports markets where, either the barrier to entry is really high, the ability for people to participate around the world, it just isn't there, for lots of different socioeconomic reasons, for cultural reasons. And so much of the people who were around Live, are just sports fans, and they wanted to all the good stuff that sports brings, being outside, healthy, team spiriting, learning how to win and lose. They saw a real opportunity to grow that globally. And so, I think there's obviously Live is a huge project that, you can't talk about hugely in public. But it's, as you said, it really shook up an industry that needed shaking up. I think that's very well publicized. And I think it's happening in other sports now as well. I think if you look at, the evolution of tennis, you look at the growth of sports as an asset class generally, the inflection of private equity money, sovereign wealth investment is really changing it. And it's going, I think sport more generally is going from what was a very traditional offering whereby, it'd always been the same since, as long as we knew, you turned up to a football match when you were a kid and it was oranges at half time and a magic sponge if you broke your leg. Whereas now, there's some professionalization around it. And that comes with, increased fandom, increased kind of Gen Z and a younger demographic being part of it. And Live, just offered that. He said, okay, golf has always been aimed at a certain demographic. And, growing up, I had a few of my friends that played it, but no one really. And then now 90% of my friends play golf. And, this crossover, for example, between streetwear and golf wear now is very prevalent. Some of the coolest people on, Steph Curry plays golf, Michael Jordan plays golf. So it's changing and it's going on that kind of socio shift where sport becomes the ultimate enabler. So what Live, I think, was always trying to achieve was to say, well, actually, this is a sport for everyone, just like all sports should be for everyone. And it meant that, that you needed a significant amount of capital to go and do that, to change something like that. It's not like you can, otherwise it just becomes hopes and dreams until someone goes, we're going to go and change it. And luckily, was got to be a part of
that. What is it about golf in general that you found appealing? Because obviously you've come from a very high impact rugby, very accessible sport. And I know you said, it's still not as accessible as some grassroots level sports, but what do you think it is now that for you as well has become appealing about golf? It's a very different game, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, golf is, you joke, it depends who you speak to people who aren't golf fans and they'll say it's kind of the best way to ruin like a 2-hour walk, 4-hour walk. For me, golf is, I'm intrinsically a bit of a nerd and it's a closed skill. So the only variables in golf really are the wind. So theoretically, you should be able to, every time, just do exactly the same swing. You should be able to adjust that depending on the lie, the kind of shot you're trying to hit, obstacles in front of you, the kind of club you're trying to hit. But if it was that easy, everyone would shoot, a perfect 54 every time, which obviously never been done. Even Tiger Woods only managed, I was reading an article the other day, he never shot a 60, he only shot 59s and 61s. And I think the best ever is maybe a 56. I think Steve Stricker may have shot that. And so it's the pursuit of the potentially possible. I think there's something I like. It's that kind of action is the same as hitting a baseball, same as hitting a tennis shot. There's something very cathartic about really whacking something, but to be able to do that in a controlled manner, I like, and it's nice. It gives me a sense of kind of mental calm as well. I like being out. It's very sociable. I play with a lot of friends. We've done a lot of kind of more businessy type kind of golf games before. And now I've got the opportunity to work into like different golf businesses. So I sit on some advisory boards for, golf technology businesses and golf education businesses. And you look at golf and people parallel it to almost business. You're saying, on paper, running a business should just be binary. Like you have a product to sell, just no different for you guys. You go out, there's a fully open market and it's fully elastic. You can go in, apply your wares and make unlimited amounts of cash. And we all know that's not the real world we live in. And golf's exactly the same. You're constantly coming up against, is it something you've done? Is it something that, there's particularly strong wind or it's boggy on the ground? It means that, exactly the same as business, you can't just nail it every single time. So you're constantly trying to find ways to improve, to refine, to get better. And that kind of perpetual pursuit of something which you're probably never going to perfect is exactly the same as running and growing a business like you guys are doing. And that the bit is, really interests me.
Yeah. I'd say you share similar thoughts.
I do. And I think that the challenge is these days, there is a portion of people over here who, think it's not inclusive. It's a game for middle and upper classes. It's the old boys club. It's white posh men doing business on the golf course, which is, that is a view that some people have. And I think that is a challenge now because people have that perception, but I agree your point. I think from a men's mental health perspective, in particular, which as we know, there's a big crisis in men's mental health. It's massive for that. 4 hours walking out in the fresh air. Yeah. If you put the golf aside, with other men, actually, it's probably one of I was listening to something else the other day. It's probably one safe place that a man feels they can talk to another man about something.
Yeah.
And I've played games of golf with clients over the years, and you got to the end of it, and they've told you some stuff that they would have never have told you in a half an hour coffee meeting, and certainly not on 20 minutes on a Zoom call. So I'm biased, but there's still a bit of a balance. We've never done a golf day as such, and it's ubiquitous with recruitment. The recruitment golf day is such
I've been to
and I do think that format is a bit tired and a bit old fashioned. And for us, I'd rather play with one person or in a four ball and actually speak to those rather than have 20 people there that you never speak to. And anyway,
we digress. I mean, I particularly like driving the buggy. It's probably my most enjoyed part of it.
Off.
Yeah. Has sport in general made you a better leader of others? Is it something that you would take into saying, well, actually, I've created that same culture as a leader for my teams in industry and in business?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you play sport professionally, but even if you play sport from an amateur level, you see a lot of different dynamics within groups of people, and you see, why people lead. And when you're younger, maybe like I used to play up a year in sports because I was this big at 13. So, you'd go and see and you say, I want to play for that guy. And you'd kind of subconsciously dissect and say, why do I want to play for that person? What makes me inspired? Is it just because I love this group of people, I want to play with them? Or is there one particular person who is really kind of motivating me to play? Or are they framing the narrative that it's such an intense competition between schools or clubs that we have to beat them? Or is it that just, you create an environment where everyone just wants to do really, really well and succeed, and you give people the space and headroom to kind of really thrive on their own? Because inevitably especially with amateur sport, you get this massive arbitrage of abilities. And it was always when we were kids that the kids who were a bit useless went on the wings. And I ended up playing 12. I played 10 originally, then realized I couldn't catch. Went to 12. And then when I got to Gloucester, he was like, you're really big and quick. And actually it's slightly different in senior rugby because you actually do need the wingers because they're quite an integral part of scoring tries essentially. So yes, it changes the way you interact with people, because it's not just, when you have a very mundane goal, like your auditors, and you just come out of university, you've just had 3 amazing years at uni, and now someone's asking you to stare at a screen for 12 hours a day and look at count inventory or receivables for a manufacturing company in Scunthorpe. You're like, this is really not inspiring me. And so it's around creating those environments where no challenge is insurmountable, but also where people have the ability to be themselves, because that diversity, especially in business, is what drives that real ability to innovate and to push forward. Because without that, you just have, as you said, 52 white middle-class men going in the same direction, which actually you just have the same viewpoint, and that never changes anything and never evolves anything. Whereas when you create really interesting teams, and certainly when we're growing the team at Live, but also in other businesses, you want to have those different viewpoints, and you want different people from different backgrounds, because then your perception of those problems and challenges are so different. And it's exactly the same in rugby. We would have islanders on our rugby team who were just like a totally different animal. Like, these blokes just did not think and understand and go about their life in a way I'd ever seen before in my life, because some of them getting paid huge amounts of money and would send 80% of it back to their nan in Samoa or something. And I was just like, you could go out and buy yourself a Rolls Royce or a Range Rover. And they were like, no, that's that whole cultural perspective. But then, so you then start to kind of stop and think, maybe my life is just totally excessive here. And I was living, in a 2-bed flat at the time, so not really that excessive. Driving I don't know what I was driving at the time, something rubbish.
Probably a Lotus.
Yeah,
sponsored
exactly.
by the club.
A Ferrari, something like that. I was sponsored by Jaguar for a long time, actually, to be fair, which was very cool, but definitely not my car. And so, that ability to understand different cultures and different kind of people then leads into like really good stakeholder management as you become more senior, but also allows you to create and foster environments that are different to normal businesses. And I am you know me both well enough, like, I'm the most casual man in the world. The fact that I've got trousers and not flip-flops on today is kind of somewhere near black tie for me. And I would, build the same environment in offices. So if people could roll to work and wear whatever they wanted, it meant that we could have this very interesting dynamic where you could talk total nonsense in one sentence and just talk about what was going on in your head, total rubbish about the weekend, what you were thinking, something stupid you've seen outside. And the next breath would be something very serious. We'll be looking at, okay, right now we need X amount of funding to hit Y milestones, and here's some revenue targets, and all those different complexities you have of growing big businesses. And to have that flexibility was always the working environment I've strived to work in. And so it always felt like people enjoy that, and you have that more informal work environment where you can really go and be yourself, but at the same time there is headroom to get stuck into, and grow into more technical stuff.
We get an awful lot of people do come to us and say, I want to get a role in sport, because people are passionate about sport, people have played sport, and I don't know if they've always got. I don't know if they always know what it's really like to actually work in finance and sport. And I know there's quite often, like to be a finance director at a Premier League football club, for example, I don't always think is
not very lucrative,
as exciting or lucrative as people think it might be. But what would you say to people about sort of taking finance leadership roles in sport?
They are really interesting. I think traditionally, in the last 5 years, you've probably seen the emergence of sports as a genuine asset class, which has changed the commercials that go around it. 10 years ago, very, very different conversation. 5 years ago, slightly different. Today, very different again. As you say, at some point, the sport is irrelevant and it's just a business with its own set of challenges. Sport creates very, very unique challenges for me, in my mind, because the stakeholders are so different. You're not like managing like physical assets or a very controllable, tangible product. Often you're controlling, groups of people who are off their heads. They've got their own agendas. They are volatile. They have, on and off field issues. They have performance issues. There is a reputational and a kind of front cover of a newspaper risk that is horrendous. And if you get it wrong, if someone gets wrong at a manufacturing plant in Scunthorpe, it barely makes the local news. If, Scunthorpe United centre forward does something stupid a night out, it may make, the front page of the Sun. And all of those things in aggregate, it just provides a very different environment. Yes, it's probably very different to traditional kind of jobs. But then if you looked at sport, say, as an alternative asset class, I think anything in that alternative asset class space can be as crazy and as wacky. And the evolution of, SaaS, blockchain, digital products, the gamification of things like Roblox and Fortnite and things like that, that is leading into a whole new, market that has the same, follows the same kind of problems, where it's just, you've never seen these before in your working life. They didn't cover this in your ACA syllabus. It's not, Doreen is making carpets or rugs for 300 people. What is the correct margin? And sport generally now as well, the biggest complication of sport now is the kind of international piece. I think where you traditionally have had very country specific sports, and you have the US, you have like the NFL, the NBA, that is just in the US. And yes, state to state is a little bit complicated, but when you go, okay, we've now got a global league. So that F1, is that live golf, is that, the cricket, that is where the complication comes, because then you need people with incredibly diverse knowledge bases. And what we were saying earlier, do you have to bring in those people, or can you find one person who can understand a multinational environment and how you grow and scale and fund and repatriate cash from global businesses? And then the complication with sport is it's not like working, because a lot of the time you're just going there for 3 days or 90 minutes to play a game. And what does the local tax authority think about that? And so you're then starting to set precedent in different countries around the world, and part of the reason people like Usain Bolt stopped competing in the Diamond League in the UK was because you have sports and entertainment rules in the UK that says, well, we're just going to take, I think, 20% off you as you leave the UK, and you may or may not see that back on your if you've got a double tax treaty with the UK wherever you're tax resident. Without getting too technical about it, but it's it is interesting in some ways, but it's not as of course it's not as sexy as everyone thinks. Everyone just thinks it's like champagne and it's everything. Every day's a match day. And it's exactly the same analogy as sport. You see the 80, 90 minutes on a Saturday, which is deeply sexy and combative, and there's the emotion and the passion. What you don't see is the 250 days a year where you've got your head stuck up your ass, just grinding in every single condition with broken bodies and blood everywhere, constantly being pieced back together. And every year having to sing for your supper to do that. And every year playing for contracts and things like that. And they're just different stress inflection points. So it swings and roundabouts. There's good and bad, both sides of the fence. If you love sport, then it's interesting. There are small niches where you'll make lots of money, but generally you need to be, the chance of getting equity holding in a, Manchester United versus getting equity holding in a nice kind of mid-cap PE real estate business in Manchester are starkly different. And come 50, 60, the financial outcome, you've been Man United CFO for a decade, you've probably done all right of it, but if you've been a PE CFO for a decade, you've probably done a lot better.
Yeah. Do you think now you've kind of married your early passionate sports life career with now a career in sport? Obviously you've worked in other sectors as well, that there's kind of no going back, or would you in the future do something different? I'm interested to know, like, is it now that's your calling? I now want to go be,
No, I think sports is cool. I think I personally like high growth, high change businesses. And so in sport, that's less and less common. I think there are some massive growth markets in sport. I think, the evolution of, sports investors, if you look at some of the big sports funds, you look at Arctos, Redbird, people like that. I think the evolution of that, and then the VC market with people like Apex and Guinness is a really interesting market, and looking at sports as a genuine asset. But then the arbitrage you'll always have there is they are investors, and when they're buying these assets, you need operators too. You need people who actually can go and run these sports businesses, because all very well buying it at a discount, it's at a discount because it's been run poorly, or it's been really unsuccessful because someone has misbought players. But you still got to go put someone in then if you're the majority shareholder and actually right that wrong. So maybe that space, but then I like the sports tech space as well. I think the way that people younger than me consume their sport now is very, very different. So you have people consuming it in a lot more kind of compact, bite-sized functions. I think the interaction with social media is really different. I think the gamification of sport is fascinating, and then you go into things like betting and augmented reality, and I think some of the stuff around that is really interesting. I like, say I sit on a few boards. One is a sports education business that is fascinating because it kind of parallels the complexities of business with the complexities of playing golf. So they run, executive days whereby they'll say, okay, right, the first shot you have to take blindfolded. And so that's exactly the same as taking, you guys starting your own business. You never started a business before, and you're just taking a shot in the dark. Like we know what we're doing. You know what a golf swing looks like, but you haven't got a clue how to scale a business and fund it, and whether the market will actually go for that. And then the other flip side of that is, the sports tech side around that. So it'll be that kind of wearable tech, visual tech. And I think there's some incredible products, services being developed in the market, which elevate fan experience, both live, and from a broadcast perspective, which have huge growth potential. And you kind of marry up all those different ecosystems, and it becomes very, very interesting because you're crossing into very different demographics. You're into a global market. You're into, the huge push for data and AI now, and saying, okay, how do you change sports for the better, such that either the fan experience is better, it's a more pure contest. Like certainly things like boxing at the moment, you'd say, okay, how can you make boxing better? You would say that the judges are too subjective. So how's the way you could measure, the acute hits in boxing such that everyone could look there in the third round, you could be like, okay, I'm 3 points down here. I need to go and get after it. Or how that changes to a betting market, how it changes to a broadcasting market, how that changes that feeling when you're watching it, how does that change the dynamic of the fight? Because you could be 5 rounds in and think, I'm still up here, and you're still just there, just doing your thing. And if you're 5 rounds in, you're 2 points down, trust me, you're coming out very differently.
Yeah. Does that mean you're pro VAR?
I think technology in the right place. I'm at best an armchair football fan. I think the last time I supported a team was when Holston still sponsored Spurs and Gary Mabbott was still playing, which is a few years ago now. VAR is interesting. I think it's like anything, it's using technology in the right place. I think there's a time and a place for it. Sometimes there is a beautiful purity about sport, which is it's so raw, and you've got to let it be raw, and you have to let that subjective nature run its course, because that is some of the jeopardy and the drama that is involved in the sport. Yeah. And something like VR just boils it down to something very binary. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of money at stake there. People did used to get it very wrong all the time, and whether that was, I don't know, there's all kinds of things we can speculate about why referees get things wrong and right. Mm-hmm. I think it's got a place. Is it a thing that every single foul should be watched back? No. I think it things like, that Hawkeye, the work that people like Sportable do for the RFU and AFL and the NFL, I think it adds a layer of accuracy that is required sometimes. But I also think it tips now into the CSR bit and player welfare. If you can actually see like the trauma that players are taking, the miles they've run, how much physical, stress they're under, then, actually goes, can you extend careers, and can you actually, because so much of sport is, we talked about it earlier, the pain of coming out of it. And so many guys, especially, there's like too many stories about footballers going broke. Bradley Wiggins now, is living on the street or something like that, someone said. Yeah. And so you kind of, it can go really wrong unless you get it right while you're doing it. And so anything you can do to kind of preserve that person's sanity, their head traumas, their health throughout that, and allow them to really see that as a job and not just a well-paid vocation, I'm pretty supportive of.
Mm-hmm. Bringing it back to, I guess, the more, dare I say, boring side, on the finance side of AI and technology.
That's the fun side. Yeah, it's the fun side.
What are your thoughts on AI and technology influencing how you run a finance function now, and what you do with that data, and how that's going to pan out over the next few years?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think even in the past year, I've seen some really interesting evolutions from a reporting perspective and from a tax perspective, which allow so much of the more mundane work and grunt work to be done, and the volume of it, especially if you're operating large groups and you need to look at big multinational consolidation and things like that. The technology available now allows you to take that away, and gets rid of all the kind of like fat finger and syndrome and casting errors and things like that have plagued people throughout the decades. I think from a performance perspective, there's some really interesting stuff happening where you can actually use AI to scenario plan and say, and I think now if you look at some of the evolutions with some of the AI engines in Google and Microsoft and some of the open AI stuff, it means that you can ask like plain English questions. Like I saw a demonstration from Google 4 or 5 months ago whereby you no longer have to put formulas into the program. You just ask it like, I've got, sales and marketing spend on the X and Y axis. If I increase my sales by X, what's the sweet spot in terms of, when that peaks at commerciality on that bell curve, and it will just go graphical representation, text, and it will write it live for you. Or you can say, we're doing an investment management, we're doing an investment mandate. Write me a story about this company over the past 5 years, factor in all the stuff you can find on the internet, plus if we had an additional X million funding, what are the potential commercial outcomes? And 80% of the thinking can be done for you. And so it changes, certainly at senior level, it changes your ability to really add value, because more of your time can be spent on true kind of thinking and that really lateral thinking that AI maybe can't do yet. I think my concerns with it are probably for the younger generation, because so much of the genuine early technical knowledge you have is just repetition. It's just going in and doing tax comps. It's going in doing audits. It's going in preparing accounts. And when that goes away, you're asking people then to jump from like no knowledge to all the knowledge very quickly. And it'd be really interesting to see how the kind of professional services industry manages that, and all the big, ICAW, CIMA, ACCA, etc. will go, okay, we still need to go through and do all this pain, but you'll never have those, training contract repetitions, and it'll feel very backwards to then go, okay, we've got a program over here that can do your job. You're about to take you 3 hours to do. We can do it in about 3 seconds. Yeah. We're still going to make you do the 3 hours of job because it's good for your training. Yeah. And it's how they manage that. I feel, like when I did my ACA, I think we were one of the first people to do it on computers. Somebody did it before me, did it by hand. And I'm like, the thought of having to write the volume in some of the like advisory papers later on, we were writing 15, 20 pages of kind of effectively, tax reports or investment mandates or, consolidation, wording. It's harrowing because, I just don't know how people did that by hand. But then, like you say, what's the next step of that? They're never going to give you an AI bot inside, an exam software, but then you'll go into the workplace and be asked to use them. And so that crossover now will be really interesting to navigate, and it'll be, who knows? But certainly from my perspective, like the more the better, as long as it's in a controlled environment. And I like seeing the commercial and finance crossover. So you're saying, we've got all this static data here, which looks at, how people spend their money. If we invest in X, how does that correlate to revenue for a business? And then if we go into different, revenue streams, so we're going to go into the micro betting space, or we're going to go into an OTT space, from a sports perspective, what does that look like in terms of the P&L if we factor in this in terms of capital outlay, and when do we get that return on that investment? So it will allow you to theoretically scale and grow businesses a lot faster. And some of the new stuff, like I love paddle, for example, and it would love at some point just to go, right, even here, we've got a little courtyard out there. Why don't we build a paddle court in there? They're about 35 grand to build. We could build that. We could rent it out locally to people on the street. We'd probably make our money back in, 9 months. Let's go and fund it. Let's pop to the guys next door in the diamond place. So have you got a spare 40 grand? So that's really interesting. And you can do that scale, and it's getting that then route to market. And the interesting stuff then is like, how do you then bring that to market, and how do you start to really dive into these large language models to understand their capabilities, and how much do you trust them?
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's so much, there's so many research papers on, like you say, the fundamental shift that's going to have to happen in education to make sure that next generation are ready to be able to utilize AI, because, let's be honest, it'd be pretty easy for the next generation to go write an essay on this using ChatGPT or whatever. So, fundamentally, the education system needs to shift to understand, well, how do we educate our kids now to utilize this technology in the right way and think differently, because they're going to be thinking in a different way. So it's fascinating. But I think the interesting bit about it generally for all of us is we're just at the start of this journey. This is literally an acceleration point, and we're 18 months, 2 years into, in a sort of broad sense where it is used commercially. So it's going to be a huge transition over the next 5-10 years. Isn't it?
It's scary. I saw a product the other day, I think it's called Rabbit, I want to say.
Wearable tech.
Yeah. And you can talk to it and say, show me a monkey. There was a monkey flying over an enchanted forest, hanging off some balloons. And it's like, here's 10 examples of it. and it visually creates them. These aren't images that existed before. We had the same conversation the other day with some guys looking at golf simulators, and kind of like that ecosystem that exists between how realistic golf simulators. If you could create a network where, like Strava, you or all your friends could compete against each other all around the world, but then you could also bring on course. So you could theoretically, like you two could go and play Wentworth, and I would join you from, I couldn't make it, so I could just join you from my shed at the back of my garden. Or we could go and have, a competition. And then you say, okay, well, you can go and play Pebble Beach, you can go and play Turnberry, you can go and play, and you can also put together a composition of all the best courses in the world. But if you got an AI bot to say, show me, analyze every single course of the top 100 courses in the world and design me a brand new golf course that's never been played before, incorporating all of the best bits and all the toughest bits from that, what would that look like? And then could you actually then go and deliver that in real life? Because that then, sadly does away with every course designer on the planet. And, all the things you think about, but, someone's already done it. And, there are all these iconic golf holes, and maybe they create exactly the same thing. Maybe they still create the postage stamp at Troon, but I'm fairly sure they won't. And whether they do that by making it ridiculously long and you've got 700-yard par fives, which is probably realistically what the pros need now, or 300-yard par threes, whether they make them something that we've just never seen before, and there are buildings in there and it's a city golfscape as opposed to on the grass, who knows, or sand. That for me is, and exploring that, it becomes deeply fascinating.
I think the other challenge though is it's sport steeped in tradition and traditions, and of course, there's all the innovation and disruption, which is great, and bringing in new audience, etc. But you can't help but think you want to retain some of the tradition associated with it.
I think you need both. If I'm being totally honest. I think especially for the next, whilst my father's still alive and I'm still alive, there will always be a place, in the same way like cricket still has Test cricket, it has 2020, it has the 100, it has IPL. There is, sport is big enough that you have the market for all of that. The interesting part will be a bit like so many other parts of society, where there is the traditional way of doing things. People will still pay a premium for handmade leather shoes, but you can go next door and build ones that were knocked out the other side of the world for, a tenner. And what drives that differentiating part? Is it because it's handmade? Is it because it's super exclusive and rare? What are all those things? Everyone has a different perspective of that. So I don't think the tradition will ever die. I personally like both. Like some days, if you take golf for example, I like to get, fully immaculately dressed in my, knee-high socks. We went down and played Royal Cinque Ports the other day with a guy I work with, and you have to wear knee-high socks, and they're happy to charge you 25 quid at the gate to buy your knee-high socks, but they're very snazzy knee-high socks. So I rock them occasionally on different courses now. And you go and play that in something that's so historical, that has so much history and legacy, and is so unique as a challenge, where you've got, undulations in the fairway that are taller than me, is, that in itself is incredibly fascinating. And you go in and you go and play up in Scotland. And we took my dad up a few months ago and played like Prestwick and Turnberry. And you say like the Open was first played here, like this is where the sport that I love was literally born, and that gives you a sense of something very different. But then the flip side of that is, like, don't get me wrong, I love standing on the tee on a live event if you're playing on a Monday or on a Pro-Am, and it's a 690-yard par five and the house music, the DJ's giving it full beans, and you're there with a set of rental clubs and a hangover, then, that's a different type of dynamic. And I think there's room for both, in the same way that you could play very nice golf on a Monday and then go away with your friends on a Saturday and have 6 pints before the first tee. There will always be room for both. But I guess the bit you would want to do is make sure that the more traditional stuff is preserved in some way, and whether that is just a changing of the guard, and some of those more traditional clubs will become fewer and far between and more exclusive, and then people will pay that higher premium for them, and then the generalist golf there. No route is better or worse, as long as there is that diversity within that kind of new product, where it's not just a blueprint golf course, like this is what it always looks like. That becomes very dull and very uninteresting. But it's part of the fun, right? Just seeing where it goes, and if you can be in the middle of that and help shape that, then all the better.
Because we're nearly getting to the end of our time, I just wanted to ask you a couple of bits around knowing what you know now and the things you've learned in your career. What's the advice that you would give to the next generation of finance leaders kind of coming through that are aspiring to kind of be where you are now, and thinking about their careers? What's the top things you would say to people?
I think knowing the difference between your shit and your shit, one with an apostrophe, one without, is huge. So much of, as you're progressing through, it's understanding, not having an arrogance to think you know everything, and being very, very kind of humble and basic about your knowledge base, and constantly trying to understand more. Even if you're an auditor, there is no reason why you shouldn't understand corporate finance, tax, and the breadth of your knowledge base is your biggest passport to the roles you probably want in the future, because life changes and your personality will change and your circumstances will change. And so it's very similar to sport analogy, like if you very early on say, I'm just a footballer, but then you get to, at 9 years old and you get to 15 and you're still, 5'5", but you're amazing at tennis, then maybe you're not designed to be a footballer. And it's exactly the same in finance. I think the earlier in your career, and the reason I chose, an ACA over maybe like a CFA, was because the investment world felt a lot tighter to me. A CFA, you've got a choice probably between doing like a PCAM and doing a private client piece, or doing a CFA and going into more like institutional banking, etc. But that still felt an area to me, whereas something like an ACA, from my perspective, was always a lot broader. And so exactly the same as sports. When I was, both my parents were athletes. When you're 10, you play every sport you can. Monday was trampolining, Tuesday was gymnastics, Wednesday was football, cricket, tennis, golf, everything. Because so much of the skill set that is hitting a tennis ball is exactly the same as a golf shot. And actually, ironically, if you can hit a good top spin forehand, it's very similar to a nice draw with a drive. And it's exactly,
or a hook.
Yeah, exactly, or a snap hook, yeah, depending how hard you hit it. And it's very similar in business. Like if you can run and grow a standing start startup, then you can go and bootstrap, a SaaS business, because yes, the content is different, but the concepts and the risk and understanding the bits that, go together to make the whole are exactly the same. So it would be, when you're young, cast your net and as far as wide as you can, actually take the time to go and learn it. And there is no shortcut. Unfortunately, I did try to do it in my early 30s, but there is no shortcut to accumulating that knowledge base. There is an argument to say now that is university redundant. It sounds quite controversial, but if you are hell bent on working in finance, we use finance in the broadest term, from bookie to banker. Then, if my kids said they wanted to do that, I'd say don't bother going to uni. Just go and do 5 years at EY, because you'll get paid for that. You have no debt. You can live at home, or you can rent somewhere in town. You'll make enough money to do that. And actually at 22, then you've got 5 years of proper experience. Because the reality is, if you're going to want to work in finance, you're going to do an undergrad. Yeah, you might be good at maths, you might be good at economics, but you're going to come out and have to do professional qualifications anyway. You have to do a CFA, you have to do a PCAM, you have to do an ACA, whatever you end up doing. There's very few jobs, unless you go into, say, computer science and quantitative statistics, that just allow you to go university thing. Even a doctor, you've got to do 5 years uni, then you still got to do another 5 years of residency. So there's swings and roundabouts for both. And, I had a conversation with someone yesterday whose nephew wanted to play pro rugby, and he was like, yeah, he's also got a golf scholarship at Brown. I was like, can I have a chat with him? Because in hindsight, not that I say you want to be a pro golfer, but a rugby player, unless you're an international, you're going to, if you make 6 figures a year, you're doing well as a regular Premiership player, and that's a very short-lived, and then you get to 30 and you're 10 years behind your peers. If you're a golfer, then you've got an undergrad from Brown, which is arguably probably one of the top 5 universities on the planet. And you get to play golf with your mates, and you get to play in the NCAA, and it's really cool. And, if you don't do that, and you can probably walk into a reasonable job in the US, or certainly come back to the UK, you can do a master's at London Business School and you'll be fine. Or you can play rugby for a decade and come out slightly broken in your 30s and have to work really, really hard for the next decade to get to the same place. Don't get me wrong, sport is amazing, and you get to hang out with your mates in your 20s, working 13 hours a week, and living everyone else's dream. That's not to be scoffed at, but it's a trade-off, because it's tough at the other end. So yeah, the advice would be go and do as much as you can, as young as you can. Even when you're at school, why aren't you out? Every school holiday, if you've got a 6-week school holiday, just take 2 weeks and just go and shadow someone. And it's so much of something like finance is understanding where you want to sit in that ecosystem. That's the hardest bit, because you can very easily get pigeonholed into one. You get guys who are 30-year-old senior managers in audit or directors in audit, and they hate audit, but there's nowhere to go then. No one wants to, because the commensurate step down in pay is too scary and too stark. And so you're just, I'll become an audit partner then. And I'll just spend the rest of my years doing it. And some people love that, and there's a place for that. But I know a lot of people that don't love that. And so the earlier on, the more you can do, the better.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Mark.
No, happy to. Thanks very much. Feel hoarse slightly.
You've done all the talking.
As always.
No, it's great to have you on. Thanks very much.
No, thank you for having me.